Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with test school and life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the three of us today, we have over 74 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating test prep professional we want to profile today is Margaret Duden. We're so happy to be speaking with you today, Margaret. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, Margaret, can you tell us a little bit about where you are and what you do?
Yes, I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I help students prepare for the SAT, PSAT, ACT, and I also help them with writing projects like high school English papers and college application essays.
So how did you get your start in test prep, and what did you do before starting to do test prep?
Yeah, before test prep, I worked mainly for nonprofits. I organized events, I wrote educational materials and books for beginning readers. I was in charge of outreach and research for the TV shows Dragonfly TV and Psy Girls on PBS. I did grant writing and I wrote newsletters. So I had a variety of roles for nonprofits. And what got me into test prep was when I went back to school in 2011 to study sustainable food production. I wanted something that I could do part-time. And so I first signed up as a tutor on Wysant.
That sounds so interesting. Like a lot of what you just said. I'd love to hear a little bit about what it was like to work on kids shows on PBS. I wonder if you're going to talk about, are you still involved in sustainable food production, or has your entire career become focused on education?
Well, currently my entire career is focused on tutoring. But my passion, I still do have a passion for sustainable food production, and I love to support local farmers that are um, that are running sustainable operations, that treat animals humanely, and that have a relationship with the people that they produce food for.
We got a surprise right out of the gate. I
I
thought we
know
were
we
going to have to
did.
wait for the end of the episode to get a surprise.
Right. So, Margaret, tell me a little bit. So, getting into doing test prep, what kind of training did you do for yourself? You know, some people start with companies, but it sounds like you may have sort of engaged in it kind of on your own terms.
Yeah, so I just started on my own and I didn't have any formal training, but I used the background that I had studying for the GRE. So I first started studying for the GRE in the year 2000, and I hadn't had math since high school. So I had to teach myself math from scratch. Like I had to learn how to add fractions, I had to learn how to do percentages. And what I did to prepare for the GRE was basically read, not only the official books from ETS, but also all the test prep books. So when I decided to get into tutoring myself, I took that same approach where I basically did a ton of research on my own, read a lot of different books on the topic, did as many practice tests as were available myself, and kind of came up with my own method.
Did you find it's funny, you're reminding me of when I first started doing test prep out of college, the math. Did you find that easy to review the math, or is it something that was like, oh boy, like how did that feel?
At first, it was pretty difficult. There was a lot of content to review, but I made flashcards, I did tons of practice exercises, but I remember having to go back and even learn multiplication tables again because I was so used to using calculators. And, at the time, there was no calculator allowed on the GRE, so I had to memorize all the multiplication tables, different perfect squares, memorize the square root of negative or the square root of 2 and square root of 3, all of that stuff, so that I didn't have to use a calculator. So I got pretty good at figuring out, I think, how to talk to other students. Because at the time or later when I first started test prep, I was also helping students prepare for the GRE. And so I think I was pretty empathetic with my students who had forgotten most of the math that they'd learned.
Yeah, it's really interesting that we often become better educators when we have a hard time with something than if it comes easy to us. I think a lot of the time people expect that students that earned perfect scores themselves will be the best possible tutors, when in fact, a lot of the time students don't know how they got to that place. If they earned perfect scores because they just had a lifetime of reading and really challenging math, and you can't replicate that in a tutoring environment, whereas you had to reteach yourself math, and you, as an adult, you paid attention to the process, and you kind of, climbed the mountain, and then you put yourself in a position where you could lead other people up that trail.
Yeah, that's, I think, sums it up.
So, how did your practice evolve? It sounds like you're saying that you started with helping other students who were preparing for the GRE.
Yes, but there weren't a ton of students that were preparing for the GRE, so I also helped students with academic tutoring. I had a couple of students that I met with them several times a week in their homes, and I helped them with their homework on a variety of subjects. And I absolutely loved that because it was an excuse for me to refresh my memory on chemistry, math, literature, history. So, I was helping students with everything from AP US history to AP chemistry, to their AP language and literature classes. So because I love learning, I just really relished this opportunity to dive into those subjects again.
So, what are some of your favorite aspects of working in test prep?
I think the main thing that I love is connecting with the students and really understanding where they're coming from and helping alleviate their anxiety about the process. I remember when I was in high school, I was absolutely terrified of the ACT and the SAT, and I felt like my whole life depended on my scores. So, what I love about this is kind of the ability to talk to the person that I used to be and tell them that no, your life doesn't revolve around these scores. You're going to be fine no matter what. And I love being able to build up their confidence in their ability to improve and reinforce that this is not an intelligence test. It's not a test of their worth. It's just, one of those hurdles I have to jump through for college
I love that
applications.
you said I get to talk to the person I used to be. That is so awesome to hear it that way because it's like seeing ourselves sometimes in our students. And then, but we now have the sort of, the wisdom, the experience to be able to sort of like connect, understanding the position they're from. So that's just a great way, I think, to phrase it.
So, what are your least favorite aspects of working in test prep?
I think my least favorite aspect is helping parents and students with their expectations, and maybe particularly parents. I feel like a lot of the students that I work with, they want to get a 1550 or above on the SAT and a 34 composite or above on the ACT. And those are that's an extremely challenging goal to meet. And I think a lot of the students and parents often think that their students can reach those goals in a very short amount of time with a minimum amount of effort by just finding out things like, oh, what's the best letter that you should choose if you don't
You mean
know?
tips and tricks, Margaret?
Um, Tips and tricks, yes. And tips and tricks don't really get you those scores at all. So I like to think of test prep more like preparing for a sport, preparing for a big game. You can have somebody explain to you how you throw a perfect spiral football, but that doesn't mean you can do it yourself. I mean, you take that input and that advice, but you have to apply it and practice it over and over. And so it's kind of frustrating when I have, kids who sign up for tutoring and they just want to have like 4 appointments the week before the ACT and think that that's going to boost their score.
That's so common, right? In all of our parents, right? And it's hard to meet those expectations when it's like that's not realistic, right? So that's a tough, we carry a tough responsibility with that with families.
Yeah, I feel like a big part of our job as test prep professionals is to frame things the way you framed them, Margaret, to try to find the right analogy for the right person to explain the challenge involved. You want to be in the top 1% in a population of 1 to 2 million of your peers, And maybe it's going to take more than 6 hours of a boot camp class for you to jump to that. Like they, it's always so helpful to explain using sports or music or art or some kind of skill that we understand it takes a really long time for some people to reach their level, and some people never reach that level.
Hmm.
And kind of establish that is we're not effective if we can't make that clear to the people that we work with.
I also, it bothers me the pressure that students face these days. Like with all the test optional trend that went on, the average scores for admitted classes at colleges went way up. And so students do have a lot of pressure to do well. And that makes me really empathize for them and feel badly that they're in this situation where there's so much pressure on them to be in that top 1%.
Yeah, that's for sure. What insights would you have for anybody who might be thinking about joining this test prep industry, or anything you would want to share with, kind of our colleagues?
I think one of the main things that I learned was that it's really important to take care of yourself as a tutor and to make sure that you show up to sessions refreshed and really able to focus on the student. I think when I first started out, and sometimes I still fall prey to this, there's this tendency to want to take on more students and do more hours, and that can lead to burnout. So I find that it's just really important for me to protect time for myself, to do things like yoga that help me relax, and always have some time built in before each session to reset and focus my attention on, the student and make sure I'm really present for them.
I think, Mike, that might be the first time in any test prep profile that someone actually gave insight, like in terms of like self-care.
Right.
Because what you said earlier, and I thought about this recently, we have to hold as tutors a lot of that stress and anxiety that we get from our parents, from our students, those expectations, like you said. So I think the problem becomes when we are holding that for them, that makes it very difficult. So that self-care is such an important component. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, and balance that with the fact that as a solo practitioner, you are your practice. So if you are not working, the practice is not bringing in revenue, and there's a lot of pressure then to take a lot on. You described when you were managing all different kinds of subjects, which I think many tutors go through that process where they say yes over and over again, and then eventually they start to triangulate and focus on certain areas. But everything about starting a new business can be, and maintaining it can be stressful. Working with students who are themselves stressed can be stressful. And just living in the 21st century has has some challenges. So self-care is really powerful. I'm going to ask you one more question, Margaret, and it is the one that I love to ask the most. What is something most of your colleagues would be surprised to learn about you?
I think the first thing is probably they'd be surprised that my goal at one time back in 2011 was to be a farmer. And I had my own chickens and I had my own turkeys. What I was trying to do was raise freedom rangers, which are chickens that reach market weight or butchering weight in 14 to 16 weeks instead of 8 weeks for the typical Cornish cross that are raised as broilers. And I ended up losing a lot of money doing
Oh.
it. So, I mean, it's really, and I was raising them on organic feed. I was raising them in chicken tractors and making sure they had fresh grass every like 6 times a day. And I was catching grasshoppers and feeding them grasshoppers. So I dedicated a lot of my time and energy to these chickens. And what I found out was the people who were interested in buying them, they just wanted the breast meat. And Freedom Rangers don't have a lot of breast meat. So what I would have to charge for a chicken breast, given that I was feeding them organic feed and I had built this whole, infrastructure with chicken tractors, it would have just been an insane amount and it wasn't economically viable. So I learned from that experience a little bit more about the importance of planning what you're going to invest in something versus what you're going to get out of it. And yeah, the importance of having a business plan.
I'm sorry that that dream didn't come to pass for you, but I'm glad that it brought you into our orbit. It is hilarious. Margaret, we could talk about you all day. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yes, please have them go to my website, which is twincitiestestpreptutor.com, and click on the contact link.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.